Hello, everybody. Here, check, here, check, here. Just wanted to give a little bit of context before we get into today's episode. I was doing my editing and I realized, probably not everybody knows what's going on in the 100 Years' War, what point in history Joan of Arc was born and prevalent. So, this is just a quick 20 to 30-second history lesson. I don't consider myself a history podcast. I like to get more into the character of these icons, but I think it's important to get an understanding of what's going on in the world. So, essentially, France was collapsing at this point in time. The Hundred Years' War has been destroying France for generations. Villages burned, people are starving. The future of France was bleak and essentially non-existent. Half the country was controlled by the enemy. This was a world where divine intervention and essentially people believed that God decided everything. France at this point in time believed that God abandoned them. If a country's winning a war, that's almost just a sign that they're in God's favor and that God wants to win the war. So when this 16-year-old peasant girl arrived and said, I was sent by God to save France. God is speaking to me directly to see France. So trusting her didn't really sound crazy. It just sounded like hope. It sounded like finally God is reaching his hand out to the French people and is hopefully going to favor them in this war. So that's just a super basic breakdown. Enjoy the rest of the episode. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Icon Edit, the show where we are becoming unbelievably gorgeous and disgustingly overeducated. My name is Monet, fellow icon in training and host of the show. So I do all the research. I share everything I learn with you guys, and you share anything and everything you know on the subject back with me, and we all grow hotter and more educated together. So anything I don't cover in the episode, tell me. Anything I get wrong in the episode, very nicely tell me. I want to build our super community of super hot, amazing, educated women who all build off of each other. Book of the week. I don't even know if I've done this one before, but this one changed the way I describe my life to myself, if that makes sense. This book is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. One of the first books I read when I was like 17-ish years old and got me completely obsessed with reading. The way it describes art and beauty and people, it's just very inspiring and kind of helps you romanticize your life. If you're into that, the way Donna Tartt writes the world is the way I like to describe the world to myself. And it just makes everything so enhanced, so beautiful, so dramatic and romantic. I love it. So highly recommend this. It makes you fall in love with art again. The characters you just absolutely love. I haven't seen the movie, so don't judge the book off of the movie. I don't think it's as good. It's by the same author as A Secret History. I liked Goldfinch better. I think Secret History, Call Me Crazy, is a little overhyped. I think The Goldfinch is better. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. Let's get into our subjects for today because I am so excited for this. I'm so excited. We are getting into the absolute legend, Joan of Arc. All of my resources are in the description. My only resource that I will give you a caveat is the last podcast on the left. That episode, I guess, is not... Those episodes are not specifically about Joan of Arc. They're about Gilles de Rais. And if you know who Gilles de Rais is, he might not be for this audience. It just goes deep into the life of Joan of Arc in those episodes because Joan of Arc and Gilles de Rais did fight together. They were very significant to each other, which is interesting because if you know Gilles de Rais, and if you know anything about Joan of Arc, like it's just an interesting mashup. But just so you know with that, be buyer beware, or just keep that in mind if you do go into my resources to learn more. There are very few women in history who completely redefined what power looks like. And then there's Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was a 16-year-old peasant girl who became the most feared and revered person in the world, without a doubt. She was the most famous person in the world when she was at her peak, and even now, she is one of the most famous individuals in all of history. A 16-year-old peasant girl from the Middle Ages. How does that even happen? So when I went into this, I knew very little about Joan of Arc. When I got started on my research, I knew she was awesome. I knew like kind of the gist, but as I have delved in, I have completely gotten swept away by Joan of Arc. Her presence, her aura, her historical weight. She is so significant in the world of power, femininity, and spirituality. We all know Joan of Arc because she dressed like a man, but not because she wanted to become one. She wasn't transgender, I guess. She wasn't abandoning her femininity, but she was transcending limitation. Joan of Arc stepped into the world of war, strategy, and chivalry. Chivalry? chivalry with the authority of a soldier while still embodying the deep, spiritual, almost sacred feminine power. What makes her so extraordinary is she didn't choose between masculine strength and feminine presence, but she mastered both and used them both so strategically to her advantage. And this made her move through this entire world with a power all of her own that was unfamiliar to everybody, but she completely embodied it with confidence. And once you understand Joan of Arc, you understand a completely different kind of power. Now let's get into just like the phenomenon that she is, because Joan of Arc really shouldn't exist in history. She was a 16-year-old, uneducated peasant girl. In the Middle Ages, peasant women were irrelevant, they were passive, they were essentially invisible. They were not recorded and they were not heard. So when we hear Joan of Arc's voice, I think more significantly what we're hearing is the silence of every peasant woman who never got one. So let's get into how Joan of Arc really even came about. All of these, every single limitation that would have held her back, she used to her advantage, which is just freaking remarkable. Let's first get into her voices, the angels. An example of an extreme limitation. I would say she was perhaps schizophrenic. She began actually hearing voices. This wasn't like a claim. She saw full body apparitions. She heard voices constantly. Like every other disadvantage she had, she effortlessly turned this into her advantage. She genuinely believed saints were speaking to her. Like this wasn't some hearsay. This wasn't her trying to grasp at power. She believed she was a direct line from God, and she believed 3 angels were speaking to her. There's Saint Michael. Saint Michael, I'm just going to read from my notes here, is a powerful archangel and spiritual warrior. Saint Michael is known as the protector against evil and the leader of heaven's armies, symbolizing courage, justice, and divine strength. And what's really interesting about Michael, they are known for being genderless, asexual, no sexual attraction or anything like that. They're completely pure. So I think that's why Joan of Arc really clings to Saint Michael as well, because he was neither man nor woman and he was completely unsexual. And one of her biggest things was her virginity. She protected that with her life and her purity, her spirituality. Next was Saint Catherine. Saint Catherine was a brilliant and devoted martyr. Saint Catherine is celebrated for her intelligence, unwavering faith, and fearless defense of Christianity, often representing wisdom and inner conviction. Next is Saint Margaret. Saint Margaret is a symbol of resilience and faith. Saint Margaret is known for her triumph over demonic forces and her steadfast devotion, representing purity, strength, and spiritual victory. She was taken by a Roman leader who wanted to marry her, but she already swore off her virginity to God. So they held her and they tortured her to get her to be willing to marry and have sex with this Roman ruler. And she didn't do it. And so eventually she was executed in exchange for keeping her virginity. So you can see why, again, this would be a very crucial pillar for Joan. She got swallowed up by a dragon. A demon came to her in the form of a dragon, and Saint Margaret had a cross and she tickled the inside of the dragon and the dragon spit her out. So pretty badass, pretty metal. But anyway, her voices would continue telling her, you are meant to save France. Her voices did not stop. They're like, you need to go to the king. You need to make this happen. You need to defend the country. But what's fascinating and what almost never happens with schizophrenic or these visionary individuals, she didn't just obey her voices. If she disagreed, she would argue back. She would say, no, I'm not doing that. She questioned and she negotiated with her voices. This wasn't just blind delusion. This was a girl with imagination, conviction, and an unshakable inner world that she was able to bring everybody else into. Let's get into the audacity of this 16-year-old girl. After hearing voices telling her to save the nation, go to the king, demand him to send you with an artillery, she does exactly that. She goes to see the King of France, King Charles VII, and convinces him to give her an army. She was able to convince him. Let that sink in. This peasant girl, uneducated, 16 years old, and a woman beyond everything, beyond every other limitation, she walks into a royal court and somehow persuades noblemen, military commanders, and the king to believe her. And not just to believe her, but to follow her. They followed her into her inner world of romanticism, of grandeur, of power, and spiritual devotion. And I love her feminine paradox. I think this is why she was so powerful and people really did just get swept away by her presence. She dressed like a man, so she wore the armor, she wore the breeches, and she had that military presence. But as I said earlier, she wasn't trying to become a man. She was not transgender. She didn't feel like she was a man. She was doing something much more powerful. She was combining both masculine and feminine power. She was masculine in action, so war, command, and strategy, and feminine in essence, purity, spirituality, and presence. Her military prowess is absolutely legitimate. She was brilliant with artillery placement. She was brilliant in rallying her troops as a commander. She knew how to get people inspired and fight to the very end. And that is the reason they won the battles that they won, and that France didn't get overtaken by England in this 100 Years' War, because that's when this all is happening. I didn't want to get too into the history because it can get really deep really fast, but she is on the tail end of the 100 Years' War. And I would say she is the biggest reason why France did get overtaken by the English in this war. But yes, so she had that masculine power and the feminine spiritual power. Like, she was able to rally people by her side using her feminine prowess or feminine power, and then destroyed her enemies in war because of her military prowess. Pretty incredible. So this was a whole different kind of power that nobody was used to. This peasant girl was extremely charismatic, very imaginative, very intelligent, and deeply powerful in a way that nobody could really understand. She had this outstanding ability to make people believe in the impossible. She was able to pull them into her vision, into her world. She was able to make these hardened soldiers and noblemen feel like they were part of something divine. Almost like they were stepping into a story, into a romantic medieval tale. And this is the awesome part that no one talks about enough. The English were absolutely terrified of her. When Charles VII sent her off to war, she had this awesome white armor that was made specifically for her by the king's, blacksmith? I don't know, but made specifically for her. She found an incredible sword with a bunch of crosses along it, and she found it behind an altar in a cathedral, and later she claimed that her voices told her where this sword was. And according to myth or legend or what have you, when she found the sword, she picked it up and it was completely covered in rust, and as soon as she held it, all the rust just shook off. And then she had an amazing horse as well. So she was sent, and she just looked the part. Whenever you were on the field, you can see Joan of Arc, you know exactly who she is. There would be no doubt in her white armor and her gallantry with her sword. You were terrified of her. The English were absolutely terrified of her. They believed, and not out of like skepticism or cynicism, they truly believed that she was a divine presence, and it scared the shit out of them. And they feared her not only as a soldier, but as something otherworldly. And that is it for part 1, people. In part 2, we're getting into how she terrified an entire nation, how she mastered intimidation, and how her softness became the most dangerous force on the battlefield. I'm looking forward to it, guys. I will see you all there. And that is it for me today. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss part 2. There might be a part 3 because I'm obsessed with Joan of Arc. She is so badass. And she deserves more limelight? What is actually the saying? More time in the limelight? Yes. I was going to do Marilyn Monroe for my icon study, but I feel like we all hear and know about Marilyn. And I'm still going to do her because I think Marilyn kind of signifies the best and the very worst parts of femininity and being a woman. And I think that's why we women are so obsessed with her, because she is the epitome of being a woman in today's day and age. So one day, but Joan of Arc is really that girl. And nobody talks about her. Like, we all talk about everybody else, but nobody talks about Joan of Arc enough. So, and what else? Be sure to go follow my TikTok, go follow my personal Instagram, Monet_Clough, and have just the most amazing day, guys. You're so awesome and beautiful and amazing. And bye.